Amy Lesnick is the chief executive and president of Pledge 1%, a global movement to integrate social impact into the DNA of every company. Founded by tech luminaries, the Pledge 1% movement has rapidly grown to over 15,000 companies in over 100 countries. In 2017, Fast Company named Pledge 1% the most innovative nonprofit in the world. With over 20 years of experience leading, scaling, and advising early stage, high growth ventures, Amy is a tech industry veteran. Amy's previous experience includes the CEO of Full Circle Fund, Indiegogo's head of cause, McKinsey, American Airlines, and Netscape. Amy's especially passionate about the intersection of technology and social change, as well as initiatives that simultaneously empower individuals and engage communities. In this episode, among other things, we discuss the power of the compound effect in relation to social impact and business impact, 5 significant trends influencing social impact, how Pledge 1% attained $2 billion in new philanthropy in just 2 years, and creative ways that businesses are contributing to Pledge 1% that leverage the core competency of their business. Without further ado, I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Amy, thank you so much for joining me today. Now, you've had an incredible career journey. You started out in the traditional business world doing some pretty incredible things like launching Netscape's first web-based email product and a stint at McKinsey before shifting focus towards philanthropy and social impact. Can you share what drove that shift?
Thanks, Kathy. It's really wonderful to be here on your Purpose and Profit podcast. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. And throughout my career, I've been really fortunate to spend one foot in tech and one in social change. And it's really been a common theme throughout my career. For me, I'm kind of an impact junkie that really thrives on driving systemic change. And so this has really been a common theme throughout my career, is really thinking about how to empower individuals and how to engage communities. And that's really the common thread. When I was at Netscape, it was really about helping people communicate in new ways or consume information in new ways. When I was at Indiegogo, it was about democratizing access to capital. When I was at Full Circle Fund, it was really reinventing philanthropy and really thinking about not just venture philanthropy, but really venture philanthropy on steroids, when individuals are really thinking about leveraging their time and their talent and all of their resources to really make a difference. And so I was really drawn to Pledge 1% as in some ways, it was just an extension, the next chapter from Full Circle Fund, quite honestly. Full Circle Fund was about helping individuals not just donate their money, but really think about, what is unique and what do they bring to bear and how can they really make a difference. And at Pledge 1%, it's really for companies to think about not just philanthropy, not just giving out money, not just doing volunteer hours, but how do they actually embed purpose into the core of who and what they are? And how do they leverage all their assets, whether that's their time, their money, their product, but also their voice, their influence, their ecosystem, to really tackle some of the toughest issues of our time and really make a difference. So for me, I thrive on organizations that are force multipliers. I've been fortunate enough to work on things that are really on the cutting edge and help them scale and work with amazing teams. And that's really the common theme. And so it wasn't really so much of a transition of like, I was doing traditional for all these years and then I switched to social change. I've kind of been bopping back and forth my whole career. And I think that that actually really enables me, I think, to be more effective in what I'm doing, because I'm multilingual. I've been on the grant making and the grant receiving. I've been on the consulting and the doing. I've been on the for-profit and the nonprofit. And all of that together, I think is what makes all of our organizations stronger, when we have that humbleness to understand that it's not just the one perspective or the one lens. It's really bringing forth all those perspectives and working together to really bring about change.
Wow. I love that explanation of your career journey. And one of the things that resonated with me was how you emphasized, regardless of what sector you were in or what organization you were working for, really the impact piece that drew you to it and what it is you were trying to accomplish while you were there, which is pretty cool to see. Now, you currently are the chief executive and president of Pledge 1%, and we'll dive into how you ended up there next. But first, can you share what Pledge 1% is for the audience that doesn't know and how it got started in 2014?
Sure. So Pledge 1%, I mean, we really are a force multiplier, which is why I said, exactly why I'm here. We are a global movement whose sole reason for being is to inspire, educate, and empower every company and every entrepreneur to leverage its assets to be a force for good. So that's pretty exciting to get up every morning and know that that's my purpose and our organization's purpose. So it's pretty amazing. Pledge 1% provides a flexible framework for companies to think about how to set aside or how to commit 1% of their product, 1% of their time, 1% of their funding in a way that could be either stock equity or their profit or revenue or something like that. But really, it's about going beyond that and thinking about all of the things that make you unique and all of the things that potentially could be leveraged to make a difference. And so our members, we're now 15,000 members strong in over 100 countries. We are an open source movement. Great ideas come from anywhere, and we are changing and getting better, and our members are sharing their best practices every day. And there's a lot that we do to really help companies think about not just why they should do this, and increasingly there's so many reasons why. I mean, just take the title of your podcast of why these profit and purpose are no longer at ends. There really is just not just the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do for companies that want to be successful, but also to think about how to do it. And so our organization is really focused on helping organizations, especially with so many of the disruptions of the last number of years, really think about, how can they set aside equity? What are the new standards? What are the ways to do it? What are the models? How can they effectively engage their employees, especially during this time of the Great Resignation when this is more important than ever before? How do they leverage their product in a way that does no harm to nonprofits, but actually helps empower them? Especially this mass stage of acceleration of digitization has been awesome, but has been quite challenging for a lot of nonprofits out there. So how can they leverage their products in innovative ways? So Pledge 1% is really a movement to do that. We were, I think I can kind of tie together our founding story with how I wound up here, because they're kind of tied together. So Pledge 1% was originally inspired by a model that was created by Marc Benioff when he started Salesforce. And the way the story goes, he set aside 1% of product when there wasn't even a product built, 1% of equity when equity wasn't worth anything, and 1% of time before there were even employees to volunteer time. And the idea was really to set his intent for the kind of company he wanted to build. A company where the business of business is being a force for good, and also the kind of people he wanted to attract, the kind of talent that really wanted to work for a company that was successful and was innovative, but also was leveraging its assets to make a real difference in the world. And alongside with him was Suzanne DeBianca, who at that time headed up the Salesforce Foundation and was a real innovator in all of this as well. And fast forward a number of years, Scott Farquhar and Mike Cannon-Brooks, when they started Atlassian, had similar principles, really the same values, and they also added the 1% of profit concept. So 4 pillars, and about, I'd say, December of 2014, so kind of, really 2015-ish, they got together with a number of other tech leaders, some of the founders of Techstars, Ron Conway, some folks from Foundry, and said, hey, I wonder if we could actually really create a movement out of this. And they launched this to get it off the ground, to really make this a model that would empower others. And through that period, we've grown, astronomically, and we've also kind of had a lot more shift of focus, not just on the taking the pledge, but also how are we helping our members move from pledge to action. And in terms of how I got here, I mean, this is kind of a a funny random story, but I was doing some consulting on my own, kind of in this space that I have continually played with between tech and social change. And I saw Suzanne DeBianca at a Social Innovation Summit, which is a conference a lot of us like to attend. And she was presenting on stage, and she was talking about the 1-1-1 model, which was originally created by Salesforce. And I knew Suzanne and Marc back from my Full Circle Fund days because they had been long supporters of Full Circle Fund. And in fact, we used to have our meetings in their office at One Market back when Salesforce was literally just a couple floors in the One Market building. And so I saw her, and I casually said, oh, I'm so excited to hear that you're taking this 1-1-1 model and you're getting it beyond Salesforce, and you're really putting it out there in a universe and creating a movement out of it. How can I help you? Thinking, could I make some phone calls? Could I do some introductions? Could I do something? And she said, kind of funny you should say that. We're really at a point where we've kind of proven that there's a there on this model, and we're looking to bring on a founding CEO to really take it to the next level. And you should totally come and do that. And fast forward, and here I am. So at the time, I thought I would never run a nonprofit again. For those who had done it, it's definitely, especially a high growth nonprofit, you get all the benefits of challenges of both a tech, high growth tech company and a resource constrained nonprofit, all at the same time. But it's definitely my passion. It's probably no coincidence I wound up again at the same space, because I really love to help great ideas scale. And this one just has so much potential, and the people involved with it are just so amazing. It's really been a privilege.
I love that story. And I love, just from the origins, that it's Salesforce who is thinking, as they were building their company before it was really a company, that these are the values that are important to them, that are going to be in the foundation of the business and will help attract the people they want working there. And then once it's a viable model, looking at how can we start a movement with this so other companies can join on and align with these values that we believe in really strongly. I think that's so powerful.
Yeah, and
Now,
Atlassian's played a huge role in this as the co-founders of the movement, and Scott personally, he and his wife have been two of the founding and funders of the movement, and really personally see this as their legacy, even beyond the legacy of Atlassian. So we've been really fortunate to have a lot of individual leaders as well as corporate leaders, not just from Salesforce and Atlassian, but also from Twilio and DocuSign and PagerDuty, and SendGrid, and a lot of other CEOs and VCs really rallying to take a leadership role, because movements are about people. So really couldn't just be the Salesforce or the Salesforce and Atlassian idea. It has to be a lot of great companies and great individuals raising their hand and saying, this is an idea I believe in and I want to be part of it.
absolutely. And I think it's that collaboration across companies and industries that's so powerful, aligned under a common vision of a different way to, or a different aspect to add into the business model.
Yes.
Now, Pledge 1% has grown a lot and has ignited, what I was reading on the website, $500 million so far in new philanthropy. Can you please explain how Pledge 1% has been able to do this?
Yeah, I'd actually love to reframe this in a positive way. We talk about the $2 billion of new philanthropy we've ignited just in the last 2 years. So maybe I'll shift it and talk about that a little bit, because I think it would probably be exciting. So as I mentioned, our focus has been a lot on not just what and why, but also on the how. And what we realized was that although there were some great best practices out there around how to do a time pledge and some great best practices around how to do a product pledge, there was a real challenge for companies that were interested in thinking about setting aside equity. And by equity, for the purposes of this conversation, I'm talking about equity as in stock equity, although we do a lot of work on the DE&I part of equity as well. So we realized that a lot of early stage companies were thinking, oh, this is something I need to keep my eye on the prize and get my funding, and I'll think about setting aside equity later. And a lot of late stage companies that were really on the road to IPO were thinking, oh, wow, I wish this was something I had done earlier. I wish that I had, done it, but now there's no way I could get my board to support kind of dilution at this point, and really setting aside equity that could be worth tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars for a long-term social impact. So we went through a process of of interviewing a number of companies that had done this and a number of VCs and created this wonderful global visionary council and coalition. And through that process, we developed some new models for what would make sense and what would be viable for an early stage company, and what would make sense and what would be viable for a late stage company in a way that was more palatable to investors and board members involved. And we developed some standards, and in doing that, we rolled out our first CEO playbook, and it actually took CEOs through a number of different models and why they would, key decisions to make and why they would choose one versus another. And we also created a companion guide for GCs and CFOs and even outside counsel who then had to get into the nitty-gritty of how do you actually make this happen. And we rolled that out. We rolled it out in 2020. And we, through that process, one of the recommendations in doing that was this concept of finding your boardroom ally. And that was boardroom ally with a little b, little a, finding the one person on your board who was most likely to support this. And then having a conversation with him or her offline to kind of figure out which is the model that would work best for your company at the stage you're at or with the composition that you have. And then working one by one to help get the support of your other board members before you brought it to your whole board and had a vote on it and move forward. And what we realized through the process, through that first year of working hand in hand with a lot of great companies between July of 2020 and July of 2021, was that we spent a lot of time with CEOs talking about their board members and what other companies their board members had supported or the firms on their board had supported, and really helping them do that mapping. And we realized that it would be really great if there was a list in advance of actual individual VCs who had raised their hand to support this, or who had actually had some experience in doing this. And we also realized that anytime a venture partner sat on the board of a company that got this done, they were so excited and so inspired. They often reached out to us and said, "This is great. Wait, can I bring you, I really want to introduce you to the CEO of this other company in my portfolio that is likely to go public in the next 6 months. And we totally need to, would love your help to kind of really help them to do this." And just a growing awareness that, I think that there's more of a common acceptance that it's not just the right thing, or the smart thing. It's really both, especially with this, growing consciousness around ESG. And that the idea of thinking about how do you sustainably fund your social impact or sustainably fund your ESG after your exit is something that should be really top of mind, and is increasingly becoming just a critical part of IPO readiness. So through that process, we announced in July of 2021 that we had rolled out this Boardroom Allies program with amazing talent and partners from many top venture firms, ranging from Benchmark and Battery and Bessemer and Excel, many others. And we announced that we had already ignited $1 billion just in that 12 months of new philanthropy, kind of in that process. And we together set the bar that collectively we wanted to ignite in the next 5 years, $5 billion, including that first billion. And then already by October of last year, when we did a momentum release, this is obviously, it's been an amazing market lately, and there was a lot of activity last year, but we already had ignited an additional billion, so we're up to 2 billion by the end of 2021. So we're still marching toward our 5 billion, and hopefully this year's market's going to be just as exciting as last year's market was. But that is strictly just counting the equity from these companies that has been set aside and the current estimated value of that equity. And many of these companies are high growth companies, and we expect the value to really increase a lot over the next number of years. And they are, by setting aside shares as opposed to a straight dollar amount, they are basically setting aside a piece of their future success. And they know that as they are more and more successful, the pie that they are creating to fund philanthropy or to fund their social impact or to fund their ESG initiatives is only going to grow over time as they become more and more successful. So this is a force multiplier program that we are super excited about, and it's really again just a great representation of the ecosystem getting together and kind of setting new standards and really supporting each other to make it happen.
Wow. I love that term, force multiplier, and the speed that you talked about and the word of mouth of the board members that or VC firms that have been involved in Pledge 1%, then wanting to spread it to other organizations that they worked with is a really big testament to the right timing for this movement and the receptiveness of um, those in positions to actually implement it, to jump on the movement, which is really, really great to see.
Yeah, I think that with each, we like to say it's almost like a drumbeat. And I think with each drumbeat, it's becoming more and more of a common practice. And I think there's a great quote. I think I might get this wrong, but it's you know that change has really happened when it becomes the default. And so that's really what we want to see. I mean, last year, Coinbase, Toast, Airbnb, DigitalOcean, Olo, UiPath, Unity, all committed equity on the road to IPO. And then other top companies like Canva and Guild Education and BetterUp and Checker, and Crunchbase and Puppet have done it as well. We worked with 14 decacorn or unicorns that IPO'd last year. And so you think of, the top companies that other companies are aspiring to be like, if these companies are setting aside equity, this is, and if they're VCs, who have got to be some of the top VCs, right, are supporting them and doing this. Many of them are doing it, within months of their exit. Then, so obviously considerable value. With each of these drumbeats, this is becoming more and more the default and more the norm. And that's really exciting.
That's incredible. Now, I'm curious, you mentioned the playbook you put together to explain different models that an equity approach could be used. Could you share just high level what one of those models looks like so the viewers has an idea of what you're talking about?
Sure, absolutely. And I should also mention that we're not just about igniting the dollars. There's also a lot that we have about how do we help those companies then move from pledge to action. And there's a number of other playbooks that we've done on that front as well, which I can talk to. On the equity front, there's really, so first a company needs to think through, is the equity going to come from the company or is it going to come from the founder? Most of our companies, it's coming from the company. But when we talk about the founder equity, we're talking about the founders actually leveraging their own personal equity to set up the corporate foundation. So this is still all very much with a corporate lens. So within corporate, there's really two basic models. And there's a lot more detail on this. So I'm going to try and do this in a really high level way without any, slides and without digging too much into the weeds. But let's call it 1% upfront and 1% distributed. So the 1% upfront model works really well for companies that are early stage. I would say if anyone was not kind of in their, was not very late stage, we would recommend the upfront model. We'd also recommend the upfront model for any company that thinks that their exit might be an acquisition because it's the most secure. In terms of really preserving your social impact. So in the upfront model, the board will do a vote, they'll do a resolution, they'll set aside 1% of the shares. Typically those shares are issued as warrants, and the warrants are held by a philanthropic entity. It's often common for someone who is a donor advised fund provider to set up kind of the shell or the MOU of what that company's donor advised fund would be later, and would hold those shares until such time as there's an exit. And then those shares could either be sold at once, or we often prefer or suggest that those shares are sold over a number of years so that even in the upfront model, the company could ride the upside of the stock. And those shares then become, whether they go into a company's foundation or they go into the company's donor advised fund, it's really up to that company to decide how they want to leverage it and how they want to use it. And it really is hopefully very complementary to their time and their product and whatnot, becomes the funding to fuel their long-term social impact. So the benefits of that are it's the most secure, it's legally binding. And so, it doesn't matter if, the leaders or the board or anyone got hit by a bus or the company was acquired tomorrow, like those funds are warrants, they've been set aside, and that philanthropy will be ignited. The downside of that, especially if you're a very, very late stage company, is that you're taking the 1% dilution all at one time. And there also potentially could be downside if you're not able to do a scheduled sale, and not all DAF providers will allow that. And in which case you're losing some of the upside of what the stock would be over time. And we believe with most of our companies that there's a lot of upside, and we want to share that upside with all stakeholders. So the 1% distributed model was created. It was actually pioneered by Twilio. And the idea was to take that 1% and spread it over a number of years. The number of years varies, and how much is pulled in up front versus a spread over time has really changed over time. But basically the concept is that a certain amount of that 1% might be put up front, but a remaining part will be spread over a number of years, so that, for instance, if you were spreading it over 10 years, on an annual basis, perhaps on the anniversary of your IPO, the board would issue a number of shares equal to that 1%, or that 0.1 of the 1%, and that those shares would then be moved over to your foundation or your DAF, or however it is that you're using those. So the benefit of that is that you are spreading that dilution over a period of time. The downside is that, if the company were to get acquired, or there were to be a change of leadership or whatnot, it's a little bit riskier to do it that way. Although there is a firm board resolution, and all of this is typically disclosed in the S1. So it's very much documented and supported that way. But you are penetrating some risks on those fronts.
Thank you for that explanation. Now, as you mentioned before, equity is just one of the levers that a company might choose from a 1% standpoint. And there's also time, product, and other forms of profit. Can you talk a little bit about, are there certain companies or industries that lean one way versus another, or do you really see it based company by company, what they choose as their mix?
Sure. I think it typically varies a little bit more by stage of company than it does by industry. But that said, I would say that, time tends to be the first pledge that many companies will take. I'd say for two reasons. One, because it's a little easier to figure out. And what you're going to do when you're two guys and girls in the garage is going to be different than what you do when you're 50 people or 500 people or 5,000 people. But the idea basically is to engage your employees, possibly your partners and your customers, and think through, like, what can you do, with your time to make a difference. And at a really, really early stage company, that might be, doing some sort of done in a day activity that you're doing together, that dovetails with an all hands meeting or something like that. As a company matures, there's typically a volunteer time off policy where a certain number of days are allocated for giving back. And a lot of this is all really changing now, I think, in this age of the Great Resignation, and companies really thinking through, there's really some amazing stats that while 50% of all employees are open to leaving their jobs right now, that drops to less than 12% if they believe that the company is making a positive impact on the world. So if there's ever a time to do a time pledge, now is the time. And I think that actually the nature, not just the why, but the how of time pledges has really changed, I would say, over the last 2 years in light of COVID. I think that giving of your time used to be you're spending X number of hours volunteering for a nonprofit. And by the way, that was typically like in person, and you were doing it all together. Now, not only is a lot of that virtual, or in the hybrid world we have coming forward, probably a little bit of in person, a little bit of virtual, but also I think the definition, over the last year, we've seen that giving of your time could be some civic engagement, getting people out to vote, or going to a peaceful protest. It could be helping a teacher understand how to take their class online with Zoom. It could be thinking through how to help marginalized communities or entrepreneurs better market their business, or leverage your product in a more effective way to be more effective in their business. And so I think that the time pledge is is typically the one that's the most prevalent. It's the one that changes, as you grow as a company, because what you're able to do certainly changes. There's so many different flavors of it being skill-based or not skill-based or in-person or virtual, or it being, just strictly nonprofit, or really opening it up to just say, how are you using your time for goodness? We also have a program called We Pledge, where in addition to the company taking that pledge, and saying, hey, we're pledging 1%, and we encourage our companies to give 1% of their time. There's a pilot program that also was pioneered by Twilio, but a number of our companies are doing, called We Pledge, where each individual employee is raising their hand and saying, I'm personally pledging to give 1% of my time, and I'm going to leverage all the great opportunities you're giving me, but I'm going to commit to actually making it happen. And some of that time could be thinking about my carbon footprint at home, because my office is now at home. So the look of what that means has really evolved and will continue evolving. But time and leveraging time is definitely, by far, I think, the one thing that anyone can do. And then I think product does potentially vary a little bit by industry, in that not every product is really suitable for a nonprofit. Or for all sizes of nonprofits. So I think thinking through a product pledge could be a straight 1% of your product is donated or is a discount. But it could be thinking about, how do you leverage your product in an innovative way to really have an impact? So Yelp, for instance, leverage their product to really showcase Black entrepreneurs or women entrepreneurs, and give them more visibility, and give customers the opportunity to make choices that way if they so choose. Postmates had a really great program where they realized all of their restaurants had food waste at the end of the day, and they had this great technology platform that could enable them to basically set a flag saying, I have food waste. And they had this great courier network that could go then and pick that up and deliver it to a nonprofit that could distribute that food. And that was like a really, really innovative way to leverage their product. So I think that product, it's really fun when people get creative and don't just think of it straight as, okay, I've got to give away 1% of my product, but they actually think about, how do I leverage my product to make a meaningful difference in the world? And that differs industry by industry, because it really varies by what the product is relevant and who the product is relevant for, but there's a lot of potential there. And the real magic happens when all of this gets mashed together and you're leveraging time to help nonprofits or help entrepreneurs more effectively use the product, or you're leveraging time to build the product in a way that's more suitable for that audience, or that builds that program. So that program that Postmates did needed, engineering time to build that. It needed marketing time to be able to market it. It needed, some education time, and it needed some, back end support to facilitate the support of the couriers to deliver it, and the accounting of all of that. I think there's a lot of really creative ways when companies are blending those together.
I love the Postmates example, because it builds off of their core competency, like what they're already doing, and then looking at how can we use what we already do to make an impact, where is there need, which is really cool. Now, let's say that I am an established company and I'm interested in making the 1% pledge. Can you walk me through the process of getting started? What does that typically look like?
Sure. So taking the pledge itself is really quite simple. You go to our website, pledge1%.org, or literally even on your phone. It takes 30 seconds. You need to be either a founder or C-level person at your company who can actually speak for your company to take that pledge. That's the only part of it. And then you'll have access to our online community. You'll have access to our Getting Started guide. You'll have access to all of our playbooks, and even a customer success call if you're interested in doing that. And I think for larger companies, what we've heard a lot is companies are doing like a lot of little things in a lot of departments all over their companies, and they haven't really pulled it all together in one framework that feels meaningful to their employees and to their customers and to their partners, and that they can hold themselves accountable for. And so I think that's something that's very appealing when we see larger companies are coming our way, that it creates a framework. and also something to reach for potentially in some areas, and some areas that they're just blowing it away. And that's great because we love to tell our customer stories, and then they become the role model, or they become the educator of the thousands of other companies that are in our midst. And so I think that for a lot of larger companies, they're thinking about this shift from the power of me to the power of we, and how can they not only engage their employees, but how do they engage their ecosystem, and how can they take their learnings and actually help thousands of other companies also make an impact in the movement. And so those would be other reasons why they would get involved. But the how is really quite simple. They just literally go on and take the pledge. They could also reach out directly to members of pledge1%.org, or reach out to me if they're a large company. We spend a lot of time helping them think through often how they're going to announce it internally and externally. And we have some marketing resources to help that, and how they can get the highest leverage for that.
So, building off of your Postmates example, I was wondering if you could share some other creative ways that companies have lived up to their pledges.
Yeah, this is what gets me so excited about being here, Kathy. And I think in the same way that companies are out there in their core business and they're looking for perfect product market fit, and what is the greatest need or pain point, and what are they uniquely suited to do. I love that our companies are thinking about that on their social impact side as well. So we've got DocuSign, who has saved millions of trees and billions of gallons of water, and is very focused on on the environment, and actually DocuSign for Forests, and how are they engaging their customers and their employees in thinking about and having an impact on climate and forest that way. And it's so in line with their core business. It's amazing, which I love. You've got BetterUp, which is just an amazing company that's really focused on changing, like life-changing personal growth and development, to really ignite human transformation. And I think that in the past, not everyone could afford their own executive coach or their own support that way. And even in the present, I think most people in business can't even do it, but BetterUp is really transforming that. But certainly folks from marginalized communities never really had access to that kind of coaching and that kind of support for their own personal leadership and their ability to really drive companies forward. So leveraging their product and services to really help communities that never had access to that kind of coaching and that kind of support before has so much more impact than just handing out dollars. I think they're really kind of leveraging, what they're core at. Twilio has done some wonderful things around crisis management, crisis response. And I think that, for the last year or so, there's been a lot of support and leveraging of their technology and their funding around COVID, but also a lot of their work in the past has also, was also exacerbated by COVID, whether that's, responding to mental health issues or crisis hotlines around sexual abuse. And a lot of these things have really been amplified through the challenges of the last year. And so leveraging their technology to really support that, they recently created an open source so that basically code that has been created to support these kind of apps could be repurposed and used by different organizations in different ways. So they're not just directly helping organizations, they're kind of really open sourcing technology to do for others. Toast is another company that just went public last year, and similar to Postmates, is really focusing on their core, which is critical food issues. And all these companies are thinking like 360. How are they leveraging their product? How are they leveraging their technology? How are they leveraging their employees, their ecosystem? And then also thinking about their internal business practices, as well as what they're doing from a philanthropic lens. And I think that one thing we've seen of the last year is that I think there used to be this over here is where we do like volunteerism, and maybe we do strategic philanthropy too, and over here is where we do like climate and sustainability, and over here is where we do like DE&I, maybe think about how we're hiring people, and this is all getting blended together. And I think that these companies are really baking it into their DNA and thinking holistically about how do they leverage their business practices and their people and their values, both externally and internally, to really bring about the change they want to see. And it's those are just a couple examples. Okta's done amazing things around like technology and digitization of nonprofits and really taking a leadership role there. But there's a lot more that I can speak to, but they're basically, the common theme is leverage what you're good at, and you know, especially where there's a gap, and don't just think about your direct impact, but think about the ripple effect you can create by really empowering not just your employees, but also your partners, your suppliers, your customers, and working with other Pledge 1 companies to really come together on collective actions. We've seen a lot of really great impact that way as well.
That's such great advice. And I love the examples because it really highlights the different ways this can come to life for different companies, and that there isn't a one size fits all, which I feel like in the past in business, when it was siloed departments, it was more copying an approach another business might do that's in a different industry, and neither of them are integrated into what the business itself does and what its core competency is. And the examples you highlighted really are business integrated and holistic, and thinking about how can we leverage what we're good at to really make an impact. So thank you for sharing those. I'm curious, as you think back on your time so far at Pledge 1%, is there anything that has surprised you?
Let's see. I guess I'm pleasantly surprised by how quickly the momentum on the equity pledge side of things has really taken off. And I don't, knock on wood, don't want to jinx it by any means. But you know, there was a time not so long ago when me making a statement like this is both the right thing and the smart thing for companies to do was met with a lot of rebuttal. Well, that's your opinion, Amy. That's not fact. And we need our companies to keep their eye on the prize and be successful. And then when they're successful, they can give back. Or when that leader is successful, they can personally, you know, do their own personal philanthropy. And I think the common understanding amongst investors that wow, we're living in a time where, you know, the most pressing issues of our time are not going to be solved by government and nonprofits alone, but the business has a really important role to play. And the flip side of that is, even if you're a pure capitalist, that these are real risks for companies. And if you want to mitigate the risk for the companies, you know, focusing on the long term, focusing on how they're going to attract and retain talent by having a values-driven business, focusing on how they are living in the communities or supporting or thinking about their supply chains or thinking about the climate is all really important to the long-term value creation of this company. And so this comment of being a good company and leveraging your assets for good is not just smart, it's, you know, it's not just right, it's smart, I think is becoming more common. And this idea that it should be an integral part of, you know, your journey as you think about becoming a public company, and that your investors and board members should support it, is becoming more mainstream as ESG becomes more mainstream. And that I think is exciting and surprising. You know, how quickly it's accelerating from a time when there was little support to a time when we have amazing support for this.
Thank you so much for sharing that. What really resonated with me was the previous thinking of kind of punting philanthropy down the timeline of when a company becomes successful, or when a CEO retires and then does it on the side, and there being a switch that's flipped of rethinking that and starting early on and baking it into a business. And it just makes me think of the power of the compound effect. So you can think about compound interest and how it grows year over year. So at the end, it's a lot better than investing something later down the road. And I think when it comes to giving back, it's the same thing. It's, you can make more of an impact the earlier you start, but you also get the benefits earlier. You get the benefits of your employees getting to be part of something that's important to them and getting to work somewhere where their values align with what the company is doing. And so not only is impact outside of the company amplified, but impact inside the company is amplified as well.
Yeah, I really like the way you put it. And I hadn't really thought about it with that compound effect. I do say we work with a lot of really late stage companies, especially on the stock equity side of things, because they're about to enter a new chapter kind of in their own journey. And this is important to think about, not just the values they're stating, but how are they going to create the right framework and the right funding to enable them to sustain it and actually grow and compound further as they enter this next chapter. But that being said, we also say that you're never too early or too small to start thinking about giving back. And it's why, Pledge 1%, as I mentioned, works with folks that are just two guys and girls in a garage, all the way through to, some of the hottest IPOs and some of the folks that IPO'd, 10 or 15 years ago. And it really is a constant journey. And the earlier you can really embed this into your core DNA, just magic happens. And I think you can't really anticipate that until you ignite that fuse inside of employees, or you really state these as values and the innovation starts bubbling up. And that's when you really start to see the opportunities between, needs and what you can offer, or opportunities that present themselves with your partners or the ecosystem, and how that is a self-reinforcing prophecy, because you're not only having more impact, you're then exciting your employees more, you're exciting your partners. All these relationships become much more sticky as you do things together. And then it continues to drive more innovation and more loyalty, and it just really does have this compound effect. So I completely agree that it's although there's no bad time to start doing this. So if you are mid or late stage or even public, or if you're a company that's just just an amazingly profitable company that's never on a journey to exit, there's no right or wrong kind of company or right or wrong timing of your company to do this. This is really an ethos of how you are building your company and the impact that you want to have with your company.
Absolutely. I think maybe a better way for me to phrase it is the best day to start is today.
Love it. Absolutely.
Now, pivoting a little bit, as you think about Pledge 1%, what elements of your company culture do you think best exemplify the spirit of the company?
So you're talking about internally, our corporate culture.
Yeah.
We have our stated values spell out the fierce, and I think each of those values are really how we live internally and how we are engaging with our members and our builders and the movement all the time. And I without going through all of what the fierce is, I will say that at least, the part is, T is for tenacity. And I think you've got to have tenacity if you're thinking about really building this whole movement and changing the default. The H is human first. So I think it's what enabled us to pivot so easily in 2020, and frankly, just put our customer and their needs in the middle and really think about, what are our social impact leaders, or what are our companies going through, and what do they need right now? And we stood up 40 weeks of programming on issues ranging from mental health to virtual volunteerism to social justice and get out to vote, and really understanding to meet people where they are, and very understanding of just of the life that we're living in right now. And we're all humans first. And the last couple of years has shown us there's a lot of bringing your full self to work for everybody. And how do we embrace that and support that internally? But how do we do that with our customers and the people that they're serving as well? And the E is about empowerment. On the fierce, we could go through the rest of those, but I think it would take a lot of time. But I'm happy to kind of post those afterwards or send them to you.
Oh, we can include them in the show notes. I would love that.
Okay.
And I love that it spells out the fierce. That's incredible. Now, in addition to Pledge 1%, you also do a lot of other things. You're an advisor with Stanford Start X Accelerator, and the Jefferson Awards Foundation, and you're a managing partner of Crowdkick Strategies. Can you share a bit about some of this other work that you do?
Sure. I haven't really been as involved with startups, but I was kind of in its early days as they were thinking about not just regular entrepreneurial impact, but also social impact and how that weaves in. And they're just great. It's been amazing to see how it's taken off, and it's such an incredible accelerator. Jefferson Awards is a wonderful program. Their parent organization is called Multiplying Good, and I encourage folks to go out there and look at it. There's a couple different pieces or components of it. On a local basis here in the Bay Area, there's a partnership with CBS, where every week local heroes are identified and showcased. I think back to kind of our earlier statement that great ideas can come from anywhere, and that you're never too small or too early to make a difference. These are incredible heroes from all walks of life they're just making incredible differences in the world. And those are showcased on CBS, both on TV locally as well as radio. And there are programs like that around the country. And Jefferson Awards was originally started by Jacqueline Kennedy and a number of folks, early on, to kind of really promote this concept of kind of, citizen engagement and really making a difference. And then Jefferson Awards, or Multiplying Good, also has a component that's really about youth, and it's focused on high schools, many of those high schools with very diverse populations, and really empowering the youth to think about, how to create a life of service, and whether that's helping to empower other organizations in their own schools, or doing direct work themselves, or having great ideas and working with some coaches and mentors to really scale those ideas. It's all really about, again, my common themes of, force multiplier and empowering individuals or engaging communities. Jefferson Awards is very much part of that. And they just recently had their annual event. So if anybody wants some great tears that will also be happy tears of just getting inspired, I encourage you to go check that out on the Multiplying for Good site. I've been fortunate also, to throughout my career to start up a course on strategic philanthropy at Berkeley High School that was really based on Full Circle Fund, and to do other things. Crowdkick was really around taking a lot of what I had learned both at Indiegogo as well as my social impact work, and really consulting with amazing organizations like X Prize or the Schusterman Foundation, and helping them to bring some of their ideas to life. So all wonderful conversions of purpose around what I'm doing. And again, just been really fortunate to kind of work with a lot of folks to make it happen.
That's so great. And I love the impact theme across all of it. Now, we're nearing the end of our conversation. Is there anything we didn't touch on that you want to share?
I think this is just a really interesting time for social impact. I mean, we've had so much disruption on so many fronts. I mean, that's just such an understatement in the last couple years. There's a couple key themes that are top of mind that I could share now, if that's appropriate. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So there's really 5 things that I'm thinking about that I imagine that anyone in the social impact space is really thinking about right now. The first is, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, is this whole like why and how of employee engagement. And I think that, a lot of our companies in the past would say that, pledge 1% and their time pledge is really one of the top 3 reasons why employees come to work there, and the top 3 reasons they stay, based on surveys. But I think this is taking on such a new meaning and significance with this great resignation and this incredible competition for talent that's coupled with a world where people are working remote or hybrid. So the natural stickiness of coming to an office and living and breathing a culture and values and connecting with people is so different when people can easily leave and go to another job. They don't even need to move. They can just like shoot their Zoom in a different direction. It just doesn't matter. And so I think that, thinking about both the importance of employee engagement being, a real material risk for your company, as well as the how you engage employees, thinking through what does volunteerism mean, and hopefully in a much more broad way of helping people and having an impact or coupling it with your product, but also engaging employees in your values, in your voice, in actions along with their families, because they're at home, as we experienced on this call, with our families, with our animals. What can we do to feel like we're part of something bigger, and feel that connectivity, but yet we are living in our own reality, which is a much different world than when you would spend 50 hours in an office, interacting with people. And I think there's so much opportunity on that front. It's going to be, I know that Pledge 1% is thinking about it a lot, and how we can help our companies and help share best practices on that front to really engage employees. So that's the first major trend we're thinking about. The second thing, and we mentioned this a little bit, is also like the incredible mainstreaming of ESG. I think that, certainly there were some people that were thinking about this, but everyone's thinking about this right now. And what does that mean? And is ESG really replacing the term for corporate citizenship? And if it does, then how do we make sure that social impact isn't just like an afterthought, really small piece of the S in ESG, but that it's actually like integrated through all of it? And that the companies are thinking about, perhaps in their G, how are they sustainably funding this work for the long term? How are they creating the right frameworks to make this happen? And how are they weaving all of this together? I mean, you could be thinking about your philanthropy and your employee engagement around environment, along with your internal business practices. Similarly with, thinking about, equity and diversity, that could be your hiring practice, that could be your supply chain, that could be your board composition, but it also could be how Yelp leveraged their product to showcase, marginalized communities. It could be about how your employees are thinking about access to fair voting, and making sure that that everyone's voice is heard. So there's a lot of really interesting ways that all of this is going to play out, and how do we make sense of it, and what's really appropriate for not only a public company, but a company on the road to IPO, and also those really early stage companies. To your compound interest, comment, a company that's trying to be successful in its early days really does need to a certain degree keep its eye on the prize, but they also need to embed a lot of these core ideas or core values early on, because it's really hard to change culture later down the road. So how do they think about what ESG means to them right now for where they are, and what their journey and their roadmap might be on these other factors, just as they're thinking about their product roadmap or their sales roadmap or whatnot. So those are two. I think the third thing, and we talked about this a little bit, is this incredible blending of what used to be very siloed of, here's my volunteerism department, here's my climate department, here's my, DE&I department, and we're seeing these all merge together. We've got a lot of folks who have now responsibility for areas they never had responsibility for. And on the flip side, as this is raising an important, we're seeing groups that used to handle all that are being split apart, but need to then think through how do they work really closely together, thinking through internal and external policies. And I think that's really exciting, because it shouldn't be siloed, and there's so much that can be done if we really layer these together and really think about how this tapestry works together. If you think of a painting that you just have a lot of little strokes, but you take a step back and all those strokes fit together. And I think that thinking of it in a much more holistic way is going to have so much more of a profound impact. But I think that the folks need to think about what it all means and what's right for them. And then the fourth thing we see is, I mentioned this earlier, is just this shift from this, look at me to look at we. Just really not just thinking about the direct impact that you can have, but what are you doing, thinking in a Pledge 1% way to inspire, educate, and empower, your whole ecosystem, or to work collaboratively with other companies. And this year, or the last couple of years, our companies have worked together to ignite, tens of millions for India, or for equitable vaccine distribution, for Afghan refugees and whatnot. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, what would really happen if our companies were thinking about their product and their time and their technology in new ways and really taking on issues together? There's so much potential there. And then I think the last thing is just this thinking about not just stating something or committing to something, but really thinking about how are you setting up the infrastructure to sustainably fund it. And that is why, we've been so focused on this equity pledge, again, the stock equity pledge, and for companies, especially that are about to enter their next chapter of being a public company, to think through, if they want to authentically live their values and continue to invest in making a difference, kind of all across the ESG and also on the social impact side, and really engaging their employees, they need to do so in a way that they have the funding to support that. And so by setting it up kind of tied to your equity, you're setting aside a piece of your future success. As the company gets more and more successful, you will innately have more and more funds to support and to play a bigger and bigger role in making that happen, and to support your growing employee base and really engaging them. And I think profit pledges or net income pledges, are also a great way to do that. As is just thinking about how are you staffing these different areas, and thinking about how you're going to, sustainably really live those values. And those are the different trends that we see that we're giving a lot of thought to, and really working with our companies and partnering with them to establish best practices and standards and exchange best practices. And it's changing every day. All of this is a forever changing, evolving industry, which is what makes it so much fun. And we're really excited to partner with all of our members, and invite everyone listening to become a member and join this great movement. And together, we're making this the new normal. We're making it the default.
Thank you for sharing those 5 trends. Those are so powerful and so important. And being in the impact space is so interesting and amazing right now.
Yeah, it's a great time to be doing this.
Now, where can the audience follow what you're doing?
They can visit our website at pledge1%.org. They can follow us on Twitter, our Pledge One handle, and they can also come join our community. And it's our community where you really have the chance to connect with peers, share your ideas, listen to others, have access to our playbooks. So really encourage folks to visit our website, to visit our blog, and to join our new community, which we just launched last year. So it's just at the beginning. We launched it in November, but this is just the platform. It's just the beginning to really spark this great conversation and enable folks to, as a movement, take things to the next level.
That's fantastic. Thank you. And we'll include links to all of those in the show notes. Thank you so much for this conversation today.
Great. Thank you, Kathy, for having me. Really appreciate it.
Wow, what a great conversation with Amy. And apologies for the interruption from my dogs in the background, which I'm sure you probably heard. But that is life when working from home. I'm sure everyone has experienced that on Zoom calls in the past. Now, I wanted to take a minute to share 3 of my key takeaways from this conversation. The first one is the story of how Pledge 1% came to be reminded me of my favorite Margaret Mead quote. It goes, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." We create change through actions. And change starts small, with one person deciding to take one action. Like the founders of Pledge 1%. Movements start when others follow their lead. So never doubt. With your intentional actions, you might just shape the future of the world for the better. Number 2, a theme throughout the conversation was the amplified impact, or the force multiplier, when multiple groups are combined to create solutions. This could be breaking down silos across your organization to come up with a more holistic solution to impact that leverages your core competency. This could also be creating strategic partnerships with other organizations to make an even bigger impact than you could on your own. So look for opportunities to unify groups under a united vision. And number 3, as a call to action from this episode, if your company doesn't have an impact approach, consider suggesting to your senior leaders Pledge 1%. Share this episode with them. And as an individual, consider what making a personal 1% pledge might look like.